Good afternoon. I'm Tom Platt with the Washington chapter of the Society for Range Management. And it's my pleasure today to introduce our colleague, Gene Fults, who will be today's presenter. Gene is a retired rangeland management specialist from NRCS, 39 years with that outfit. And he's also a current director for the PNW section. After retirement, Gene continued employment with the Center for Survey Statistics and Methodology at Iowa State University. And it is that center that houses the NRI data for USDA NRCS. And with that, Gene, I'm going to turn the screen to you, and thank you very much for joining us, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Let me share my screen and get the show started here. There we go.
Got it.
So looking okay. All right. So, yep, I am Gene Fults, rangeland management specialist, retired. I started out in Oklahoma, field office range com there, and I actually did my first NRI segment there in Oklahoma in 1982. Moved down to Florida. I was area range con down there for about 20 years. And so after I got my kids raised, I left them and moved to Nevada as the state rangeland management specialist for about 3 years. And then I finished up my career at the West National Technology Support Center in Portland. And like all retirees, you never know for sure what you're going to do when you retire, but I came up with an idea in the last 90 days and pitched a deal to Iowa State, CSSM, and started working a part-time contract with them remotely. So it's still good to be having some of those things to keep your mind active and think about. So the title of this is National Resources Inventory, the NRI. I know the title said something about natural resources, but it's a national resource inventory of natural resources. So specifically going to talk about the on-site grazing land study. Grazing land study is a subpart of the larger or primary national resources inventory. The grazing land study started collecting on-site data back in 2003. Bureau of Land Management lands was added in 2011. We started on pasture land in 2008, but it didn't come online till 2013. So 2013 was the first year where we had data, on-site data from all 48 states. And so we've continued to collect that every year since then. With this variety of landscapes and land type cover out there, we had to use definitions that have not changed in 56 years. And I know that's aggravating to some people, but whenever you have these long-term longitudinal studies, a key factor in keeping them scientifically correct is not changing anything midstream. So my presentation points for today, I'm going to go over 3 different chronologies talking about natural resource inventories. And I'm going to do this because similar to using a hand lens on a grass spikelet, whenever you compress those time periods, you can get a little bit better detail of what went on during that time period. Then I'll go on to the current grazing land study, talk about the protocols, some of the projects, and some of the products, then end with a summary. And so, you know, even Society for Range Management has a pretty neat chronology going on. In 1866, the word ecology was coined, and just a short 80 years later, the Society for Range Management was formed. And we went through several concepts about how range ecology works, that idealized composite range there, the mountains all the way down to the meadow, is out of Sampson's 1924 Native American Forage Plants book. We were still thinking of Clemencian idea of it was just like one big organism that was kind of self-adapting and would always heal itself. But as we learned more and more, we went on to quantitative ecology and eventually on to ecological site descriptions. So Lewis and Clark expedition, President Jefferson's instructions were pretty clear, the soil and the face of the country, its growth and vegetable productions. Sounds like natural resources to me. The animals of the country, when do the plants put out flowers, the mineral and water, but noting the temperatures. And so this wasn't just saying, well, the waters were cold. You're actually doing some measurements. They had to take that thermometer along, and they were keeping track of all that. 1812 General Land Office was established, which helped keep track of the inventory of land as it went from the federal government to the state governments and on out into private interest. All that information that Lewis and Clark sent back kind of maybe stirred up a little bit of the idea for a new science, and that would be ecology. Later, the general, and with this things advanced, technology even advanced even a century ago, and they instead of having the artists go out, they had actual photographers go out to capture those resources. So here's the trail. They always lay out that Lewis and Clark expedition like they didn't have very many choices, but certainly they had lots of choices on the way as they went through the Mississippi watershed, Missouri watershed, and then on over into the Snake River and the Columbia River. GLO officers, one of the artist renditions of a place in Oregon, the shipping, the railroad, the river, the burnt out forest in the background. It was a pretty interesting approach to documenting what the resources were. Then later came the photography, which has been very valuable to those of us in range ecology to look at those ecological dynamics. A lot of that in Miller's work. Okay, so sometimes you need to have references for your history periods. So about the time people were sitting back drinking a Coke and eating popcorn and watching the second Tarzan movie, all the way up to Orson Welles' suspenseful Touch of Evil. This is the second time period. And so 1934, the National Erosion Reconnaissance began. 38, Iowa State was contacted to kind of develop some of the methods that NRI came up with. And so in 1958, they came up with the statistical stratification to establish this inventory of what was going on out on a national basis. Okay, the next time period, you had Star Wars through Conan the Barbarian and Avatar, a little bit more recent information. Larger NRI in 1977 was established by an act of Congress. And so they started collecting this land cover information every 5 years. And 1982, like I say, I was one of the first years that I started working for SCS at the time, and I got to complete one of those trifold forms that they were going to, thick paper that they were going to send off and have it scanned. A lot of that NRI information was used in Farm Bill and other publications. And then as funding and technology came about in 2000, They established the remote sensing labs, and they started doing this annual photo interpretation of land cover. And so this stratification of this land cover, it started out with 300,000 segments, 800,000 points, and then they would kind of mix them together into their statistical black box and make selections out of that. And those that were identified as having grazing land on it were pulled out. And 8,000 of those points were reviewed each year. And so again, a longitudinal study, everything has to be exactly the same each year of data collection. So the map that's all red, that's kind of the distribution of those 300,000 segments. And there are different sizes, 40, 80, and 100, and 640 acres. The field map over on the left is kind of an example of what the segment would look like. You'd have 3 points on it, georeferenced points. And the remote sensing lab people would look at that and say, well, points 1 and 2 are probably cropland. The number 3 over to the left in the darker green, that's probably rangeland or grazing land of some sort. So that's kind of the process of how the on-site grazing land study points are selected based upon this statistical panel. And that allowed them to, over time, develop trends in what that land cover changes were over time. And this, from 82 to 2015, you can see the cultivated cropland acres had actually dropped, but the amount of the gray, the developed land, had kind of increased. Everything else had a little bit of variation, but again, you're talking about huge numbers of acres there. So here's a pie chart, ends up that rangelands, and this is on non-federal. So rangelands, 21% of the area is rangeland, 21% is forest land, 21% of the lower 48 is federal land, and they're generally equally mixed amount of forest and rangelands on the federal land. Pasture makes up 6% of almost 2,000 million acres. And this is just kind of a depiction of how that land is spread out. Rangelands is the orange, the blue is the pasture land. Okay, so onward. Other things became viral, so I don't have any references. So hopefully you all are mostly up to date from 1999, and we're moving forward now. Just talking about the grazing land study. And it started in 2003 with 17 states. And again, technology changed. We would use these GPS units in order to get to the point. Back then, those Newtons, you had to start walking before they would start to work and register. The military had some satellites turned on and off, so they weren't really dependable, but they have gotten much more dependable now and lighter. And today we're collecting information with a data collector the same size as a cell phone. So 03, first 17 states started collecting. In 08, we had the Oregon pilot study, which is a project jointly with the Forest Inventory and Assessment people, Montana Land Fire Project. First research paper was published using NRI grazing land data, and Bureau of Land Management land was added to the study, trying to achieve that all lands go, or all rangelands go. Here's that scientific paper that was published national ecosystem assessments supported by scientific and local knowledge that used a lot of that NRI data. It's by Eric and others. All right, so let's switch and go to looking at the measurement and settlement assessment protocols that are within the on-site grazing land study. First thing we want to do is make sure that we try to capture the growth of the vegetation kind of at its peak amount. And so, which, you know, throughout the West, there's quite a variety of times of the year that's best to get out there to do the inventory. But we came up with an idea to tie it in with the major land resource areas. We would have 3 data collection periods, 3 90-day data collection periods, March to May, May to July, and July to September. And that matches in pretty good. I mean, the southern parts, just to avoid the heat. Down in Florida, that's just a little bit drier time of the year and easier to get around. We every year we follow, as I said, it has to be done the same way every year. So we have a handbook of instructions, and we've worked over the years to make sure that these instructions match up with the ARS's grassland shrubland monitoring manual, as well as BLM's terrestrial core methods protocols. So the measurements and the assessments are equally the same, no matter which protocol you're talking about and which group is doing the inventory. So 22 chapters, you start getting some data collected at chapter 3. Chapter 6 is where you really start to get intensive information brought in. Keep separate. There's the idea of the conservation management unit, which is kind of the pasture that the macro plots and point fall in. The macro plots 4/10 of an acre, 2 transects that form an X, 150 feet long, and the quadrats are just the small frames that we put next to the marks along these transects. And the point is the center of the X. It's a thing that we GPS to. Later on, I'll talk about point intercept, and that's a different point altogether. But the macro plot point is what is how you locate the center of the plot in order to get back really, really close without having to leave a stake or something like that. So it ends up being a circle. Those smaller circles in there are the production protocol quadrats. There's 5 for herbaceous, 2 for woody, expanded plots appropriately for woodies. And if a woody plant occurs in the herbaceous plots, it's not collected. It's just the herbaceous. That way it's scale appropriate. And production is done last because after you do 13 protocols going up and down that line, there's quite a bit of information that is collected up and down those areas. So we try to take the least destructive protocol first and follow that stepwise on each location. So quite a list of information that's collected, fairly extensive landscape descriptions, slope shapes, and all that sort of stuff. All the basic protocols. We have disturbance, conservation practices, resource concerns. Even sagebrush shape was added, which is kind of associated with the sage grouse emphasis on the federal lands. Nesting habitat and screening and that sort of thing. The layout is based on a magnetic north. That way we have some consistency. Some people are familiar with delineation setting, others are not. So it was best at the time at the beginning just to use magnetic north. The idea is you stand on the point and reel out the tape using the compass to guide. Make sure you start out going towards the northeast, and then ultimate goal is to get to the 75 mark of both transects right at the center. Try to keep the tape as close to the ground as possible. Again, this is for consistency's sake, because people, if you say stretch it out, well, some may stretch it out tighter than others, but if you're keeping it close to the ground, it's easier to read and it'll be more consistent. Also, some of the assessments take into concept the spatial scales of the macro plot versus the CMU, because you can, as far as disturbances go, you might have cattle grazing in that CMU, so that you would mark as a disturbance. But for some reason, where that point landed, livestock just don't go there. So there would not be a disturbance there for livestock grazing. So two different spatial scales of occurrences, and the same thing could happen vice versa. A little bit of information, have rodents and non-rodent damage. So you need to become familiar with a lot of the animals, and the damage does not have to be totally destructive. It can be a very natural disturbance, like you'd expect for the holes and that sort of thing. So if you notice it, you'd mark it down as a disturbance. Another assessment that's used is trend. Long time it's been used throughout the range profession, and it is just kind of a visual assessment. It looks like things are going good, or no, it looks like it's going away. And so here's a sample from MLRA 23, where with 450 macro plots, about 40% of the time you could tell just a general observance of which direction things were going. And what this does is it allows you to maybe pick out those locations that are toward a particular quality of ecological site condition and compare that to the ones that are leaving. The plant census were very valuable. It's a 15-minute walk around that macro plot. You have a lot of information of plants gathered through all the other protocols, and so you can import them into the plant census, give them, 1 of 5 population ratings. But that 15 minutes of walking around really increases the number of species that are found, in particular forbs. A little bit more on the shrubs. Grasses, it doesn't make much difference, but it certainly increases the capture of forb species, which gets into that functional group concept. Do rangeland health, of course, got all the attributes that we look at. Also allow for the describing indicators of rangeland health if a reference sheet is not available. And that's a pretty good recent article or technical report on describing indicators of rangeland health. Sometimes we repeat visits. Here's one in Washington, 7 years apart. Originally just saw this in the data. It looked like that the point had really decreased in quality. And so I went into looking at the pictures and then saw that there had been change, not necessarily in the macro plot or maybe not necessarily in the CMU, but those wind turbines, the roads accessing those wind turbines actually allowed greater utilization of this area. So there's kind of offsite effects and spatial scale effects that this rangeland study is going to capture. And we are increasing the number of repeat segments. So I thought I saw somebody, Claudia has her hand up, so I can.
Is that okay in this context? I hope so.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Gene, if you would go back a slide. because interpreting photos, when you're the person who does the work and has been there, works well, but like when I teach it, you just think about this. So increased access by whom? Just people wandering about because there are roads, and then they're wandering around to just daydream and go hunting and whatnot. And so we're changing. Certainly, it didn't change the livestock grazing intensity.
Well, it may have changed the access to livestock because the livestock would follow those roads.
Oh, okay,
easier
gotcha. Okay,
paths.
not simply that the pasture
Yeah.
was a different size or shape, but
Right.
okay, right, easier for the lazy cattle
Right, yes,
to
exactly.
move
Yeah.
along and work through some shrubs. Got it.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
The
'Cause it
graded
really is
road would be smoother.
pronounced.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought that. Okay, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it surprised me too. Why did it change that way? Well, that's a possible explanation.
Well, as long as we're there, this also illustrates the difficulties of photography, because you'll notice the rocks are in different spots. I assume the plot is in the same spot, so it probably has to do with focal length and that sort of thing.
Absolutely, Ken. You can't be the height of the data collector. It makes a big difference. The time of day, shadows. Yeah, one can see a lot of things if they want to in some of these comparisons. But I think they got and part of it was I zoomed in a little bit in order to make sure that the posters or the photo board was not visible, because that had the secret code information. That you
Well,
have
yeah, the inner spaces and the shrub density appear to be different, but I mean, this could be several years of precip difference, seasonality. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, yeah,
And we do have weather data for this point
which would, of
for
course,
the year of collection, and it is from Prism. It's modeled, but as well as the data collector's estimates is in there. So
Ken, there's going to be a little human error in reading the compass, and also, the magnetic pole shifts a bit. That could be, I don't know, a degree or two, I suppose, or three, which might account for what Ken observed with the rocks.
yeah. And it is the focal length, and it is surprising how different those digital cameras have been over the years. Without any special settings, and really screwing it up. But we recommend no zooming, and just use the regular fixed angle. And so trying to get the exact same picture is extremely difficult. Extremely. Is that good? Okay, another protocol is the point intercept. That's representing the pin flag, that wire. That's the size of the quadrat, is the diameter of that wire. So we'll try to capture up to 6 layers of foliar cover, plant foliar cover, and one basal or ground layer, and then the litter layer. 101 marks along the transect tapes. As you go down through the canopy, you only identify, you hit that sagebrush. You don't have to keep identifying it as you go through. That dead sagebrush that's out in front of her, out in front of the data collector, if it was to hit that, it would still be considered a foliar canopy as long as it's attached to the ground. If it's attached to the ground, it's assumed to be foliar canopy. If it's detached, then it becomes litter. Scale appropriate collection of the herbaceous. Sometimes weight estimates are allowed. It depends on the state. Most of the time we encourage them just to go ahead and clip everything on herbaceous. But the annual growth on woodies, there's been a lot of work done to come up with that annual production estimate just by measuring it by volume. Another way to do it is by using the weight unit. This data collector is holding up a small piece of sagebrush, where they will go around inside of the expanded plot and count up the number of these represented in there. And then they will strip off that weight unit and strip off the annual growth and get that weight to have it entered into the CASI. Longitudinal studies don't change much, but there are certain adaptations. In 2009, the plant census was actually just looking for noxious weeds, noxious plants, but we switched that over to all vascular plants. Plant height protocol was the Robel cover pole. Kind of further modified the gap protocol to have both perennial and all canopy gaps. And then 2015, we required that the soil pit needed to be described. We've always had them dig the soil pit and just confirm the soil component that's at the mark. But now then, since 2015, they still confirm that that's the soil component, but they actually describe the soil horizons down to 20 inches. I think BLM goes down to 30 inches. So there's the Robel pole. It offset it from the line a certain distance, and then using the same height of pole, looking at the object pole with the bands and describe, which ones are obscured by vegetation. This didn't work very good in shrublands because you can get a shrub right in front of you and obscure everything. So that's why it went to plant height, where you have a 12-inch cylinder to the side of the tape, and whatever the highest point is of the plant going up in that cylinder, it is measured and recorded at the mark, both herbaceous and woody. And it's mainly used for wind erosion studies. This data is really becoming important for wind erosion. You could use it a little bit for ESD wildlife interpretations as well, but its main use right now is wind erosion. The gaps, you're measuring the distance between canopy, if it's a foot or more. And then you got to look pretty closely if there's canopy is more than 50% of a tenth of a foot. That is a breaker in the gap, so it doesn't take much canopy to break that gap. Soil pits being described, digging down 20 inches, and then trying to leave it as undisturbed as possible. A lot of good soil scientists out there. Still doing the PED dipping, and then every year we do quality reviews, and all data collectors have to go through a calibration for all the protocols that we have. Okay, so that's the protocols. That's the information that's gathered. There's been some projects coming along. You've heard of the Oregon pilot, where we worked with the Forest Service. They had FIA teams going out and the NRI teams going out, and kind of a designed approach where they were joint in some counties in Eastern Oregon and singular in other counties, mainly based upon the amount of forest that they already knew was there. Definitely 70% of it was in that 15-inch or less precip zone. The main things I wanted to look at was the distribution of rangeland, bare ground, the cover types, if there's any invasive species, and then fragmentation. And so there were a lot of problems. The first one, of course, was the size and scale of the plot layouts. The FIA layout has 3 legs, 120 foot each, and the NRI plot has 4 legs, 75 feet. And so if you're having any dependent variables that you want to measure, those scales need to be exactly the same. So there was some calculus went on, and we finally figured out that if we added 21 feet to the end of one of our NRI legs, we could have a spatially correct scale so that all the plant species would work out. And, you know, species census was taken in these 3 circles at the end of the transects. Rule sets, FI has been going on for a long time. You aren't going to change them. NRI has gone on for a long time. You aren't going to change them. So that makes it very, very difficult in some situations, especially when it comes to juniper, on whether to call it forest or rangeland. So another project was a land fire project up in Montana. This is the land fire layers, and they had a lot of this information for the forest, but they didn't have anything for grassland or shrubland. So this NRI study helped them get some of the vegetation types, the canopy cover, canopy height, and some of those fire fuel behavior models into that information. There's this 20, this is the area up in Montana of grassland where they did the comparison. I think they came up with like 56 more macro plots that or conditions that would fit into land fires, state and transition models. So it's a really advanced their work, and they were able to take that and apply it to other areas of grassland. Lots of products out there, SEEP, RAP, Land Data Commons. We've had 3 rangeland assessment reports. The second pasture land report is coming out this year. We've developed an ecological site table, and there's a lot of products that can be adapted, special projects such as, you know, finding rangeland health indicator reference sheets. So here's the ecological sites. If the macro plot, a lot of times there's a part of the macro plot that data is not collected on, or you might have 2, sometimes 3 different ecological sites on there, or a portion is unavailable. And so these are all curated to be complete ecological sites, single ecological site within the macro plot. And the numbers there represent different ecological sites. And so the size on the far side kind of gives you an idea of how populated, how much information is in there. You have to have confidentiality agreement to see this because it does have some location information to it, but it's arranged so that column B is one location, column C is another location. And each time you click on one of those tabs across the bottom, column B is always going to be the same location. So it makes it easier to compare all the way through for one particular location, or to sort them and group them according to different parameters. The site index, site information has some summaries from the data, you know, like the percent litter, percent bare ground, rock fragments, some precipitation ideas. Some of those things which you may say, well, I want to see everything below or above a certain number. So you can do certain projects there. NRI does not produce it's not a statistical result. This is just the raw data results. And so it doesn't have any weightings, but it's just a bunch of good data collected in the same way over time. A lot of information can be used for your rangeland health reference sheets. Here's an example where it compared a sandy ecological site in two different MLRAs, grouped them up with similar groups of similarity indexes, fairly high similarity indexes, and then looked at the plant base and found that 67A sandy has quite a bit more plant base to it than the 34 sandy. Now that it's only 4 or 5%, but still that's almost double of the difference between the two. So it could be because of the plant species, or it could just be the nature of the ecology of the two different MLRAs. But this is the type of information you go through these data points and just throw it into an Excel statistics and come up with your mean and your extremes. Go to this website, grazingland.cssm.iowastate.edu. That's where public facing all this information is available. It's got some of the most recent scientific research that's used the NRI data for the different publications. This last rangeland report, resource assessment, we have enough information that we can look at 2 different time periods and be statistically significant and have confidence in it. And in this particular instance on the Great Plains, it shows that Texas and New Mexico had a hydrologic function disparity between the 2 time periods. And if you go back and look at the climate data, you'll find out that New Mexico and Texas and some of those other places had severe droughts during that second time period. So some of these changes, it's not trend, it's just a change difference. But we're hoping by the time we come up with this next rangeland resource assessment, we'll have 3 time periods. And so we'll truly be able to talk about trend. A lot of maps in there. They're kind of avatars that represent what the data says, kind of represents the conditions that might be out there. A lot of people agree that Texas looks pretty bad. But whenever you consider, Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas being those areas where there was a lot of farming in the past, and then during the Dust Bowl, it went back to grassland. So one of those attributes, which is soil, has been permanently altered from its natural condition. And so all this is saying that condition is pretty common. You go and stop at 10 stops of rangeland, and 3 of those stops, you'll find that soil health attribute has moderate or greater departure. So it's kind of understanding what those maps are saying will help you kind of review that section. Ultimately, on 409 million of non-federal rangeland, 18.9% has some level of departure in at least one of those rangeland health attributes. Okay, one more point and I'll be through. And that is the summary. So it's the national, the N stands for National Resource Inventory. It's a longitudinal study, and it's limited to strict adherence to protocols and QA/QC. The next grazing land resource assessments can have 3 time periods. They're 5 years long. It's also going to include some of the federal lands, some of that information. This information is collected once and used many different times and in many different ways. And each year of data collection creates new relevant information. So thank you for your attention. I think I covered everything that I can think of to cover. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Gene. And the floor is open for questions or comments.
I have a question, Gene, and that this is going to go back to our early days, both yours and mine. I was involved with NRI, first became involved in NRI in '87. So the second year of its, or second cycle of its existence. And then continued through for another 10 or 15 years or so, doing it sporadically. And I know there's a big difference between what's collected now and what was the information that was collected early on. But yet there is some similarity and some sameness, isn't there, between those?
Not the details. There
No.
would be like the conservation practices and resource concerns, and some of that type of information was collected. There's also a lot of photo interpretation of closeness to water and streams and that sort of thing. And those 5-year cycles, it was not the detailed rangeland type of information. It was just another part of the land cover general question that all land covers got.
Right.
So it
Right.
wasn't the detailed rangeland on site that was started in '03.
Yeah. Got to see some interesting spots that you wouldn't get to otherwise.
That's right. And amazingly slow.
Well, Gene, I have a question,
Yeah.
and it's more logistics. How did you deal with, or how does NRI deal with access to wilderness areas, wilderness study areas, private lands? There must be some tales to tell. I mean, are the points selected randomly?
It's statistically drawn. Yes.
So they must land in some of these areas that aren't easily accessed and et
True.
cetera. So I'm just curious how that affects things. How are those challenges met?
Yeah. Those are all thrown out to the states. Those 8,000 segments, all those that are chosen are sent out, and the states will do their own photo interpretation. And so some places that were had enough grass cover to be photo interpreted one time as grassland, 5 years later it might be thick enough to be forest. So there's those things. The wilderness areas, the true wilderness areas, we don't get permission to go on. So we can't dig a soil pit or clip the vegetation. So they aren't real good at giving us permission, especially in wilderness areas, because you can't go out there in a vehicle and carrying 40 pounds of stuff. Is only about a 2-mile type of deal. And that's, we do encourage them to, we do have a place where it's hazardous, inaccessible, way too steep. Even if you get to the point and it's more than 60% slope, you would call that inaccessible. And then you have to go through the permission processes of finding the landowners. So it's not a simple, easy thing that, the Bureau of Land Management on federal lands, they can go out wherever they want to and not have much trouble, except for where the fences or gates are going across private lands. But there's 9 categories where you can not have to collect that point for various reasons. But other than just don't want to, it looks hard.
The other
And
one,
so
other
the number
follow-up is
become-
Alaska. Did you cover
we
Alaska?
don't, we haven't done Alaska, no.
Okay.
We've tried to get some studies up there, but the logistics in Alaska are complex. And so it's not a simple way to get started. I know the BLM collects some up there. But we don't and then the ownership's quite different too.
Go ahead, Jack. Your mic's muted, Jack.
One of the data collection things you did was a rangeland health or pasture score. Can you
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about what constitutes that score?
Yeah, the rangeland health is based upon the preponderance of evidence. They have 17 indicators, and you rate it to 5 different levels of departure from reference, which is pre-European, down to total departure. And so
Okay.
it's a summary there that and those 17 are split up among the 3 attributes. And so you rate the attribute on rangeland health based on the number of indicators that it's departed. Now, pasture condition score is a little bit different. You come up with a level of management need. So the lower the number, the higher your management input needs to be in order to fix the problems. It's more of an agronomic approach on the pasture land condition score.
Sure. And then could you go back 2 slides, please? Maybe one more. There. So the yellow is the least, the 10 or less is the least departure.
Correct.
And I'm looking at Northern Oregon, just south of Columbia, which I think of as all being wheat or annual grasses, just south of the Columbia, I mean. And how could that be only 10% departure? It must be.
Okay, it's at least one of those. So it could either be soil, or it could be plant, or it could be hydrologic. And so if there's invasive weeds there, then probably that plant attribute would be the one that's departed.
My point is that if I understand, so maybe this is my lack of understanding. The over 30 would be the most departed from original conditions?
No, the over 30 has the most area of land that would have that condition. 30% of the land of rangeland would have that condition.
That condition being what? Reference condition?
That one of the range health attributes are at moderate or greater departure. And so the red doesn't necessarily mean it's worse. It just means there's more of it. It's a more common condition.
Hmm. Let me try again.
Okay.
What's healthier, over 30 or 10 or less? You say this is range health.
The general area would be in better condition.
With
There's
which?
more area that is in better condition, right? or is
Under which
functioning,
category?
functioning better? Well, it depends. You'd have to break it down, and it does in those reports. It does break them down pretty good on a statewide basis of what those conditions are. So you can get those statistics and the real numbers from that report. So it's yeah, it is a little bit confusing the way the colors make it appear. Does make it more is worse, but that's not necessarily a true interpretation. There's just more of the land that might have that condition.
Well, Jack, aren't you asking why isn't that yellow right below the Oregon state line more red?
Yes, it's either wheatland or annual grasses. So why isn't that very, very red?
Okay. So that means these areas, the polygons, would exclude all other land conditions and cover, and that's only represents the amount of rangeland that would be in that area. It's not necessarily the whole area, but it's the amount of rangeland that would be in that area. So if there's only 20% of that area that is rangeland, but still 10% of that whole area is departed, that means most of that rangeland there would be in bad shape, even though it's only at 10%.
Okay.
So to stick with Jack's example, there's not much true rangeland left because it's converted to crop agriculture primarily in wheat and some pulses, sunflowers, etc. But there are a few little patchy bits of range. For example, the Nature Conservancy's grassland preserve south of the old PGE tower. I'm getting real particular here.
Yeah.
So that's what helps it to be in the yellow, because they're managing in a reasonable fashion and they have small acreage, but the true range is in better shape. Hope I'm not messing with your question, Jack, but I'm as stuck as you are on understanding.
Thank you for being stuck.
I like your persistence. I just jumped on your bandwagon.
Yeah. It depends on the way the spatial nature of data collection was achieved. There might not have been any data collection on that Nature Conservancy property. There might not have been, even though it's a big area. It could, even if it was, because of the way they throw statistical weighting onto those segments on how important they are and how many acres they represent, it may not match up with your idealized knowledge of the local area, just because of the spatial scale that it's originally designed. Those 3 or those 4 general regions. Now then we're starting to get enough information. We can get real good information at state level statistics. And so as this data longitudinal study goes on and more repeat data collections, the information is just going to get smaller and more applicable to smaller areas.
So Gene, on scale then, let's go to this yellow example. If we zoomed in and zoomed in and zoomed in and zoomed in, we would probably get more of the white, right? If the map was just expanded and you had real information there, there would be no on-site rangeland samples, would be a bigger part of it.
Correct.
That's right. Okay.
Correct. Yes.
All right,
Last
folks, I think that's a good.
One more question. So
I'm not
the
gonna
takeaway.
Go ahead, Jack.
I don't want to. The takeaway from this slide is at 18.9%, moderate to extreme departures. Is that good, bad, or indifferent? Or is it just a simple statement?
It's a simple statement and you'd have to go into the rangeland health, interpreting indicators of rangeland health to fully decide what that means. But it does show it could be established conditions were already caused by something else. There's already a departure as in the plowed lands. Same way with on a lot of the federal lands where a lot of the departure occurred back in the 1900s. And so it's not really a reflection of management degree. It's just the ecological processes, how well they're working up there on resource condition.
How can we tell we're getting healthier over time?
Well, if we keep collecting data, and we might find that out on this next report where we have 3 time periods. You know, you have to have those 3 points before you can actually say trend.
And lastly, how long does it take 2 people to collect all this data on one transect? Is that a day job or a half-day job or 2-hour job?
Yeah, 2 hours. Once you get
Really?
onto the site. Once you get onto the site, and if you're an experienced crew, 2 people can get it done in 2 hours or so. But you might have had to walk in, you know, 1.5 miles and or bounce in, whichever. Sometimes it's easier to walk than ride pickup and some of those rock fields.
Thank you, Tom, for letting me ask additional questions.
Oh, sure, Gene, and I'm not gonna cut you off, but I am gonna stop the recording.
Okay.
Gene, thank you for a very interesting overview of this topic. And as you can see, it stimulated a lot of discussion. So I appreciate your sharing your expertise with us. I'm going to stop the recording, and we've got about